Good afternoon. Please welcome to the stage Chief Legal Innovation Counsel at Marsh McLennan and the CLOC Board Vice President, Farrah Pepper.
Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks. I've been feeling it since 1966.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our CGI Day 1 Super Session. So, what's a super session, you may ask? And who decides what makes a session, well, super? The answer lies within our awesome CLOC community of volunteers who make up the CLOC Education Advisory Council, or in short, the EAC. First launched in 2021, the EAC is made up of dedicated cross-section of the CLOC ecosystem, and they help identify and foster the wonderful content that you're going to see throughout CGI and throughout the year at other CLOC initiatives. A super session is dedicated to elevating key topics that you, our CLOC community, have told us that you want to hear more about. In today's session, we are proud to partner with KPMG to tackle an emerging and increasingly critical topic in the corporate world, ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. In this session, entitled No Plan B, what does it all mean for me? We will explore how ESG is driving corporate and business strategy and what it means for legal departments, and specifically for you as legal operations professionals. Our super session speakers will hit on several key topics, including the role of legal in ESG, the legal and business risks associated with ESG, and the role of legal ops in an ESG program. We'll also get to hear specific use cases related to DEI, supply chain management, compliance, and disclosure. Personally, I'm looking forward to whether our panelists think that ESG is a crisis or an opportunity, or maybe a little bit of both. So let's dive into the exciting, evolving world of ESG and its impact on legal operations. So let's get this super session underway.
One blue marble, drifting, vulnerable in the nothingness of space. The decisions we make as individuals, companies, governments determine whether this fragile orb is a thriving network of fairness, health, and prosperity,
or becomes a lifeless rock.
Thankfully, this doesn't have to be our reality. So what can we do?
ESG, environmental, social and governance, is the way to embed positive impact into our actions, not just around climate change, but the whole fabric of society.
From giving marginalised communities a fair voice, to standing up for human rights and ensuring a just transition to a low-carbon economy.
Because what companies do will determine the talent they attract, the customers they serve, the profits they make, and ultimately, the impact they have on society.
On ESG, KPMG leads by example.
Decarbonising our business by reducing consumption and driving positive behaviour change. We are holding ourselves to account by transparently reporting against World Economic Forum metrics and navigating ESG complexity and driving transformation for our clients too.
Using insights and digital tools to help organisations understand and build plans to mitigate their climate risks and embed this into their business strategy. Building transparent, resilient and responsible supply chains free from modern slavery and human rights abuses. Providing independent assurance and building confidence in ESG reporting and disclosures. And helping borrowers, lenders, insurers and investors make the right decisions on sustainable finance. This is a once-in-a-generation chance to accelerate change and make things right for life on our blue marble.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. It's great to be here with you. My name is John McCalla-Leacy. I am a KPMG partner, UK Vice Chairman and Global Head of ESG, and I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today. Now, you've just seen a very short summary of ESG, and now what I'm going to do is just to take about 20 minutes or so to further unpack ESG, to walk through the connectivity between the E, the S, and the G, and also to illustrate how this seemingly disparate set of topics come together to form a single construct. I'll then draw out what ESG means for us all in terms of our roles before we're joined on stage by the panel and moderator. So let's get started. Now, when I talk about ESG, I like to talk about the E first, then the G, and then finally the S. Now, let's get started. So firstly, on the E, we've heard so much, haven't we, about climate change, with climate dominating the agenda for such a long time. And the visible effects of climate change are becoming ever so much more extreme. Now, I don't know about you guys, but for me, I don't remember a time when I've heard the term record-breaking mentioned so many times. We've had record-breaking snow in Madrid, heat waves right across Europe, record-breaking wildfires in Turkey, and also in the US right here. And we had a devastating flood, didn't we, in Pakistan, which saw 33 million people displaced. Just to put that into context, that's about 110% of all the inhabitants of the state of Texas. That's significant. Just have a look around the audience, and it's great the lights up and see. How many of you are parents here? Just wave at me. Okay, wonderful. Can you keep your hand up, please? Keep your hands up if you are a parent to a child or a young adult under 22 years old. Okay, so probably about half of you. Here's a message for you. Your child, virtually every year they've been alive, virtually every year, has been hottest on record. That's pretty compelling, isn't it? So when we look at the E in ESG, the E is comprised of a number of topics, including climate risk and nature and deforestation and waste and pollution. And when we really focus on the dialogue around the E, so much of the conversation is focused on what? What do we need to do? Well, we need to reuse more, consume less. We need to transition to net zero, and we need to do that as quickly as possible, whilst also nurturing biodiversity. So the E focuses our minds on the what. Now, when we move over and talk about the G is again comprised, once again, of a number of topics. And these topics include the governance structures, the policies, procedures, board oversight, enterprise risk management, and the ethical behaviors that we all need to consistently demonstrate. So the G, for me, really focuses on one thing, and that's the how. So we've got the what, and then we've got the how. Now we move into the S, fundamentally S, which is so important and is positioned perfectly right in the center, in the heart of the ESG construct. Once again, the S is comprised of a number of topics such as workforce, skills of the future, inclusion, diversity, equity, and equality. The S fundamentally considers the why. So why am I here? Why are any of us here? Why do we care if the planet gets warmer and warmer? Simply because the why is for you, it is for me, and for those parents we saw, it's for our children. The S is really focused on sustaining an environment where we can all live and where we can all flourish. So the S is the why. And when we look at this picture, with all these words that I've talked through, which hopefully you can see on the stage on the left and the right, it can look quite confusing, and some people can feel quite overwhelmed. And it's reasonable to conclude that, because when you look at this, it's quite disparate topics and somewhat unconnected. But actually, when we take a look again and we apply some systems thinking, we can see the interconnected nature of ESG. For example, when businesses fail to manage their waste and cause pollution, this may adversely impact on local communities, which in turn is likely to be inconsistent with their stated corporate purposes. And similarly so, this is true for the connectivity between the projects that companies finance and the impact on biodiversity. Actually, there is consistency and there is connectivity between all of these. We can actually summarize all those words that I've just showed on the page with just two. So really simply put, when we look at ESG, what is ESG? It's actually really about restoring balance and fairness. That's it. You see, an effective and congruent strategy, an ESG strategy restores balance and fairness, not only between our interactions with the environment, considering the many, many resources of the planet, ensuring that we're not taking out more than we're putting back in, but also balance and fairness with our interaction between each other. Ensuring that we have diverse, inclusive, fair, and safe work practices based on the fundamental belief in the dignity and the rights of others. Balance and fairness also in our corporate governance procedures, ensuring that they are transparent and also that we have due consideration, not only to shareholders, but also to the broader stakeholders right across the communities in which we serve. So, ESG, big topic. A lot of the dialogue's focused on the E. So I'll just do a very brief interlude into some science in terms of how we got here. So what we see on this slide here, there's a lot of data on this slide. You don't need to worry about reading all of them. Just focus on the trends. So what we see on the left-hand side are a number of social economic trends, things that we usually associate with positive developments. Growing population, growing GDP growth, growing FDI, this foreign direct investment, thriving urban populations. See, all these indicators are going up on a very steep curve. And when we look at the right-hand side, what we see is that both the left and the right are broadly following the same pattern. Now, I'm going to test some of your eyesight now. Have a look at the x-axis. There's some numbers, there's some dates. In the middle, there's a date in red. Can anybody see it? No, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's 1950. What's the significance of 1950? Post-war. Spot on. So what this shows is the great acceleration. So we see that there's a rapid uptake in all of these things when we really, we're nestled in a peace period, in a post-World War period. And in summary, when you look at the left and the right, it shows that we've enjoyed huge social economic development, but on the back of exploiting our planet. And considering the S, there are challenges here also. Now, whilst humanity has made significant progress in raising the standard of living for so many across the globe, great disparities still exist. So today, half of the world's wealth belongs to less than 10 people. Actually, the correct number is 8, and all men, by the way. Number 9 is a female. The poorest 50% are responsible for minimal greenhouse gas emissions, but yet they are most impacted. And gender violence is widespread across the world. Now, when I look at the S, I often talk about the unders and the overs. Underrepresentation in senior levels of business and politics, but overrepresentation in areas such as criminal justice systems or mental health conditions. And this is true for a number of protected characteristics: ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation, gender, and so on. And when we consider the G, the real changes here, the stakeholder expectations and the needs and behaviors are changing alongside this erosion in public trust. Global citizens are exercising a much stronger voice in setting the agenda. And you see a famous quote here. It's been attributed to many, many people over the years. I think the first one is Ernest Hemingway. And it says, rightly so, it takes years to build up trust. And this is particularly true in the social media age that we live in, only seconds to destroy it. We see retaining public trust is incredibly difficult. There's an increased need from the legal profession to identify and mitigate ESG-related misconduct and reputational risks. And in this area, we've even invented a word. And I don't want to hear from this table because you got it right before. What's the word that we've invented 5 decades ago with respect to misconduct? You've all heard it. It's greenwashing. Increased risks, increased risk and consequences of litigation, and a really key requirement to keep data protected. So where is this drive for change all coming from? Well, what this slide shows is pretty much everywhere, I guess, is how I would summarize it. Right from investors who are wanting companies to demonstrate that their ESG strategy is validated through performance, which they can see in a way which is consistent and robust, through to regulators who want companies to be compliant with legislation and statutory requirements. Business partners and others, they want to see and they want to hear a compelling sustainability story aligned with their own values. And employees, well, we all want to work in purpose-driven places, right? End customers, suppliers, and B2B customers like yourselves are wanting to see shared ethical and responsible practices. Also, just one thing that's really quickly, whilst we will talk about, and I touched on a lot, the role of regulation and reporting with respect to ESG, there is a shift happening right now from reporting to transition planning. The need to build transition plans which are consistent with getting to net zero. So I'm from the UK. In the UK, the government has mandated for all listed companies, for all financial services firms, by 5.5 months from now, they have to have transition plans consistent with getting to net zero. This is happening right now. So there's a real momentum, a real push that we're seeing in this space. And just to illustrate this number is it's a significant number. To illustrate, in 2021 in the UK, in Glasgow, we saw COP26. So this is the gathering of the parties to talk about climate change. Now, there was a tremendous build of momentum there, and approximately 30% of GDP, global GDP, were covered by some form of net zero target. And I'm going to ask these guys over here, post-COP26, what do you think that number was? It was 30%. There was a build and grow in momentum. Just give me a number. Don't be shy. You're going to be shy. Anyone want to give me a number? No idea. 35%. Higher. 50 higher. 60%. Wow, that is not right. Okay. The actual answer is 90%. So now, right here, through COP26, through negotiation, but good try, by the way. Sorry, I'm just... Sorry. We now have 90% of global GDP which is covered by some form of net zero target. And considering the large list of stakeholders that I talked about, and the fact that a lot of this change has been driven by regulatory requirements, right now, nearly 100%, to be specific, 96% of the G250. G250 are the 250 largest global companies in the world. 96% of them now report on sustainability and ESG-related measures. This is happening right now. So, and I would add, the G20 250, that push is also being cascaded down to their B2B partners and through the supply chains. We're also seeing that CEOs believe that stakeholder scrutiny around ESG will continue to accelerate. Over 60%, 62% are looking to invest 6% of their revenues around over the next 3 years on becoming more sustainable businesses. So let's just take a moment to consider this change itself, because we're seeing a momentum, we're seeing a drive. So let's just focus on change a little bit. Okay, I'm going to do the participation thing again. Hands up if you've been responsible for delivering change in your organization. Okay, please keep your hand up. Hands up if you've supported somebody who's been responsible for delivering change in your organization. Okay, keep your hands up. Hands up if you know somebody who may have done some change at some point. Put your hand up. Everybody put your hand up. Okay, right. It doesn't work unless everybody puts their hands up. Right, okay, you put your hand down. Fantastic. And I'm so pleased that everybody put their hand up. So, right, this is it. How was that? How was it delivering change? It's hard, right? It's really tough. 275 trillion is a number that you see. That is a number which is estimated by two independent sources. This will be the cost to transition the globe to one which is sustainable and consistent with keeping 1.5 degrees alive between the period 2020 to 2050. So when we consider that change is hard based on our own experience, and you've all said that I know I coaxed you, you've all said you're experienced in change, and it's a big number, we should not therefore be surprised by some of the challenges that we're seeing. And we should be well prepared. So this curve, in terms of what you see, is based on the Kubler model. Many of you would have seen it. It's taught in university, on MBAs. It depicts a typical change curve, which looks like a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster. And we know, don't we, that there will be excitement and drive, where people want this change to happen. But that excitement could turn into frustration when things are not happening quickly enough. But there could also be resistance and even anger for people who are seeing things change that they don't want to change. But ultimately, from experience, we see and we know that this leads to acceptance, and from acceptance to commitment, from commitment to an acceleration of the change. Now, of course, CEOs, we see here, they're facing resistance, business, economic, and political challenges. We all know that. Okay, and on one hand, they need to navigate the need to transform themselves to sustainable businesses, whereas on the other side, to mitigate such things as inflationary pressures that they're seeing in their business today. But when we consider that the momentum that I've just mentioned, 96% reporting, 90% of GDP, and when we consider the role of the regulators, we know that the direction of travel is clear. Firms with ESG scores expect to benefit from a low cost of equity. We also see that by 2025, 75% of those in the workforce will be millennials. And they're twice as likely to make investment decisions based on ESG scores. And they're also more likely to determine where they work based on whether or not the corporate values are consistent with their own. And also we're seeing that businesses that measure ESG, not only can they report on progress, but they're also driving value. As an example, the value that they'll drive is they're able to cut scopes 1, 2, and 3 emissions significantly. What gets measured gets managed. So what does this mean for each of us in the legal and the ops profession? So really, it depends on your perspective. We speak to clients a lot, and I often say it's important to meet our clients where they're at. And fundamentally, there are 3 positionings that our clients tend to take. Number 1 is really focused on compliance, and that's about must do. So tell me exactly what I need to do so I don't get into trouble. That's the must do, right? And this is really focused on understanding the evolving disclosure requirements, which is complex. CSRD, TCFD, TFD, TI, NFD, ISSB is just a small number of this alphabet soup, we call this, of requirements which are just growing and growing and evolving. So compliance is the first step, but it's far from an easy one. It requires data. Data has to be trusted and transparent. It requires controls, governance, and ultimately third-party assurance. Just showing a map real quickly, and I know some of you may not be able to see this very well, but just really quickly, the map shows a high-level view of some of the compliance-driven aspects of change that you can see, which is widespread right across the globe. So compliance is focused on the must-do. But strategic is really about the could-do. Well, I could grow the top line, maybe by selling renewable energy products, green finance products, and so on. I could improve the bottom line by implementing ESG plans to get that benefit from the low cost of equity. Also, I could tap into ERA. And by the way, I'm from the UK, we say ERA. We do not say IRA. IRA is bad, okay, where I come from. I just want to be clear, okay? So the Inflation Reduction Act, 369 billion of tax incentives, you could potentially tap into that. So what could you do? And then finally, and this one is just amazing, what should you do? So should do is really based on a deeper desire to drive direct altruistic actions. And the most obvious example of this is Patagonia. Have you heard about what they've done? I'm getting some nods. Okay, so what they've done is they've transferred ownership of this huge company to a trust and a non-profit, all the profits goes to protecting the environment and fighting the climate crisis. They just said, we don't need to make any more money. Now, just finishing up, wrapping up. So the starting point depends on your perspective, but irrespective of your perspective, as I said, the direction of travel is clear. We all have a role to play in enabling this change. And what you see here, some of the topics we're going to touch on is the need in the legal profession to focus on controls and data integrity, trust and transparency, disclosure requirements, risk management. I want to say thank you for listening to me. I hope that was okay. I hope you'll all agree with me that ESG is important and you can see that drive to move things forward. Right now, I would like to introduce our panel. Please join me on stage and please give them a warm welcome. They've been sat there for a while listening to me. To Laurie, to Lauren and Stuart, coming on stage. Our panel.
Thanks, John. Even sitting out the back there, we could feel the energy and the passion from John in that session on ESG. So my name's Stuart Fuller. I'm the Global Head of Legal Services for KPMG. And as John said, very honoured to be joined by Lauren Elkerson, the Chief Legal Officer of RGP, and Laurie David-Henric, the Chief Legal Officer for a Fortune 500 company. So we're now going to have about a 20-minute discussion around things, no audience participation. Won't have to put your hands up, won't have to guess numbers and dates. We'll just kind of put these guys through their paces for a while. So John, you've teed this up really well around ESG. We just heard from you about the different forces, what's happening in business and how ESG is really starting to drive business change and strategy. So I think it'd be good to start with each of us in turn. So Lauren and then Laurie and then John. You know, what is your C-suite saying to you about ESG and what do they really need from you in relation to it? So Lauren, let's go with you first.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. And hi, everyone. So I think at a basic level, what the C-suite needs from the legal organization is the same thing that they need from the legal organization on any complex issue, right? They need to be able to rely on a legal team that understands the regulatory complexities, understands the risk associated with the particular organization and ESG issues, and can ensure compliance. That's table stakes, right? We're no longer at a place, as John just talked about, to be able to say that ESG is someone else's issue. It is at the legal team's door, right? But I think what we're also seeing is an opportunity because we're seeing other C-suite executives who really see and want to implement ESG as part of their executive strategy, as part of their enterprise-wide strategy. They see the value that ESG brings to stakeholders and to the bottom line, and they want that implemented. And what a great opportunity for the legal team from a place of knowledge to be able to step in and say, here's what we know, and here's how we can really be a strategic business partner to the C-suite on these matters.
Laurie.
Yeah, obviously I agree, of course, with everything that Lauren said. And I would like to build on that to go even further. So, yes, the C-suite needs us to support them with ESG, but that's also true the other way around, right? ESG, well, the corporate and the business strategy supports ESG and drives changes on this topic. Typically, if you look at the 2021 Edelman Trust Barometers, it says that now the business is the most trusted institution over NGOs, over governments, over media, to move the needle on ESG and to actually act on it. So that tells a lot about what we can do. And as head of legal ops, I try with my team to be very actively participating in this global effort. So for instance, what can we do as legal ops? We can run more granular reports, even more granular than what exists already at the organization level. We can report on them on a more regular, more consistent basis. We can also measure progress, because very often we report, but nothing happens. Measuring progress is where we can show that this needle is moving. I also want to say that we can influence outside of the boundaries of our own company. We can typically, if we talk about our closest partner, the law firms, we can ask them to show their commitment on ESG and to maybe even integrate ESG in their legal advice.
Now, John, you would talk to CEOs all the time. What are you hearing from them?
Yeah, as you know, I do. I spend a lot of time speaking to CEOs and board members. I mean, some are just a bit overwhelmed, and this is why I touched before, didn't I, on just the whole piece. But I mean, fundamentally, you know, we see 3 gaps that we help our clients to close. First of all, you know, exactly as Lauren said, is the understanding gap. So. You know, what requirements do I need to adhere to? And this is not necessarily an easy thing to understand. One client I spoke to had 42 different regulatory reporting requirements across the global business, which is significant. So there's an understanding piece there. Then there's a second piece which is around, okay, well, I've understood that. Commitment. What do I then commit to? So clearly you do need to commit to your statutory duties with respect to reporting, but some also go further. They go further in terms of voluntary reporting and so on. So you understand, you commit, and then really importantly, you take action. And taking action requires data, which is robust, so that you can show and you can demonstrate that you're making progress. You can do this in a way which gives you confidence. And I know there's a little skit that I say sometimes, just to be careful in legal ops, from the washing, wishing, and hushing. You know, washing, you know, greenwashing, you've heard of this before. So make sure that when you're actually committing something, when you're communicating something, that it's defendable. You know, green wishing. Wishing is like, I'm going to get to net zero, and you kind of cross your fingers and you haven't got any plans to make it. That's not good enough. Let's have robust plans to make sure we can get there. And green hushing is really important from a legal standpoint, is that we've seen this so many times where our clients may make a bold statement and they'll put it out there and then immediately through social media say, well, what about this? You're working in this region, or you're doing that. So it's understanding where you've got exposures and being able to mitigate those. So those are some of the things that we're hearing when we speak to C-suite.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting. So look, let's go from the C-suite into legal department and legal ops, given that we're at CLOC, and CLOC exists for legal departments and legal ops. So the question is legal and legal ops leader or supporter? So is it at the table, at the main table, in the game, or just there to help provide data and compliance? So maybe we go, Lauren, you first. Laurie, you first, and then Lauren.
Sure.
Sorry.
Well, both, obviously, leader, supporter. I don't know, do you need me to elaborate on that maybe?
Yeah, that's a bit of a shorter answer than I was expecting, but yeah, let's keep going.
I think you have to think about this in two folds. On one side, you have the strategy. And I think this is where legal can support the business and the leaders. For instance, if the company is exempt from disclosing a certain type of information, is it actually still a good idea? From an optics perspective, is it a good idea to not disclose? Another example would be to support the decisions that the leaders and the business are making around typically what the investors or the public opinion is expecting of us versus what is actually possible, versus what may actually trigger another legal consequence. So all of that is where legal can support. On the other side, you have this increasingly complex legal and regulatory landscape around ESG. And this is not only coming faster than ever, but it's even more complex than ever. I mean, if you think about it, there's a lot of challenges for businesses to develop this global footprint in environments which sometimes have competing requirements. Some countries may require very different things, very opposite things. So this is where I feel legal should lead the discussion, identifying all the components of this incredibly complex landscape.
Lauren?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I do think it's both. You know, one of the key steps, and I know many of you probably know this in here because you've probably gone through this exercise yourselves within your own teams and your own organizations, is one of the key steps when you're starting to define your ESG strategy is, in addition to defining who your stakeholders are and doing a materiality assessment, is that you really need to decide who is going to be the owner of ESG strategy, right? And a lot of times, I think it makes a lot of sense for that to be the legal department, for that to be the CLO or the general counsel. And that's for a few different reasons. It doesn't always have to be. Every organization is going to do this differently for what makes sense for them. But I do also think it makes good sense for it often to be the legal department. And that's because the general counsel or this chief legal officer really has a unique position in the organization to see the organization from a holistic perspective. So they see the various departments and how they all interact. They see the regulatory issues. They have relationships across the organization, whether that's at the board level or every particular area within the organization. And so that creates a really good opportunity for the legal department to step up in that. But I want to give 2 caveats that I think are really important here. First of all, it's really important to remember that ESG is a team sport. If it looks and it appears to be led by just the legal department, it's not going to gain much traction. We all know that. And that we don't want it to be that anyway. We don't want it to be legal's thing. We want it to be the organization's strategy, right? And so it's really important to utilize those relationships with HR, finance, the business, you name it, procurement, whatever it is, right, to really work together to do this together. The second piece is I think it's really important to remember that you really do need the buy-in from the board and the executive level. You need the other executive team members to be bought in on this as well. So this is where legal can use their persuasion hat, which is something that we have. Some of us were litigators for a reason, right? To be able to really gain that buy-in when it comes to the when it comes to ESG strategy and to drive it forward.
Perfect. So next question, Laurie, this is just for you. So Lauren has just spoken passionately about where legal fits in, and probably more from the legal counsel side. So where does legal ops fit into all of this, and where does tech fit? Is tech the solution?
Well, that's not an easy question, thank you. So yes and no. And first I want to say, ESG often is seen as just a general population problem, right? But actually, it impacts everything that we work with. It impacts the assets of the company, liabilities, operations, obviously, reputation, employees, and all of that is supported by legal. And legal, guess what, is supported by legal ops. So this is where we fit. We fit in the bigger picture. And I think that because of that, we should co-lead the charge. Also because ESG is likely to increase the number of litigations, because the environment, as we said, is changing so rapidly that with all of that, there's going to be a lot more litigation cases. Typically between 2017 and 2020, 1,800 ESG-related litigation cases were recorded in 40 different jurisdictions. So that tells you the volume that it represents and what we can do with it. So take the solution. Part of it, yes. Typically, it can help us as legal ops enhance our ESG reporting, managing the workflows, managing the processes, streamlining the data, the collection of data, identifying trends, opportunities. But, and I will leave John talk more about that if we have a minute, but when we were preparing the panel, John shared very great insights around AI and how it can help on the G specifically, but that's for in a minute. So long story short, no tech is certainly not the answer because we cannot reduce ESG to a tech problem. We need to think bigger, and we need to drive some kind of an impact agenda within a company to give ESG a global narrative. And for that, we have to work with the law department, of course, to make sure that ESG is this lens through which all the decisions are made, through which thought leadership, brand strategy, innovation, services, products are articulated. And we can also work with HR to help promoting and accelerate the upward mobility of underrepresented groups in our company. We can work with procurement for supplier diversity, starting with law firm, once again, our closest partners. So, yeah, tech is good. I love tech, but I don't think that's the only answer.
Perfect. Well, I think this is my opportunity, just following up on technology and AI, as Laurie was saying, to put in a shameless plug for 2 sessions that KPMG Law is running tomorrow. First in the morning is around legal tech and digitizing the corporate legal department, and in the afternoon it's all around AI. So no more topical event or topic to talk about at CLOC. So there are 2 sessions tomorrow that I'd really encourage you to come to. So that's shameless plug 1 over. So final question, and John and Lauren, this is for you. So, ESG clearly creates a number of questions about what would happen, what it means for everybody. It also creates huge opportunities. And John, you touched on this a little in your session around where legal can play. But what actually can legal do to help shape the future around ESG?
Yeah, I think legal is essential to the future, and this is true, by the way. I'm not just saying this because there's a load of legal people here, and if I don't say that, I'll get into trouble. I really believe that. I'll tell you the reason why. When we were talking beforehand, I talked about the conversations I had in COP26, last year also in COP27 in Egypt, and more recently in Davos. And there was a single construct which has gone through, which has been consistent through all discussions. Just remember the 275 trillion number I referenced, this big change. What everybody's saying is, this is too big to handle alone. What we need to do is we need a new form and a new number of partnerships, a new real focus of collaboration. They call this, UN calls this radical collaboration. Collaboration needs alignment and agreement, and with agreement you need contracts. So it's really important here. And when I say, one of the examples we gave with these very strange bedfellows, one of the largest global banks in the world teamed up with a homeless charity and a provider of gas boilers. And they came together in partnership to build, to produce, and to finance sustainable homes of the future. So what we need through legal and ops is really just a driving or an engaging in that conversation in terms of how do we get these different parties to collaborate to start to drive transition and to get into this $275 trillion worth of work that we need to do. So honestly, I believe that this spirit of partnership will be crucial to what we do moving forwards.
And Lauren, your views?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think what we're doing now is really defining what the future is going to look like. So we're at a really critical time, and that's an exciting time that we kind of get to pave the way of what it's going to look like for legal departments when it comes to ESG, whether it's going to be something we're going to be tangentially related and give off to someone else, or whether it's something that we're really going to take ownership of, because it really does touch on so much of what we do when it comes to disclosures and reporting and various other and other regulatory issues. So I think it's a really exciting time. I think it's exciting to jump in and get your feet wet with it because of that, and learn what you can and join the conversation. I think it's really exciting.
Perfect. Well, I think that there's one more point to raise, I think, which is a couple of use cases. So you just said, like, jump in, get your feet wet. I think that's actually quite an Australian expression. So having some influence on you out in the back there, Lauren.
I told you, I got it from Bluey. That's where I got it, yeah.
Right. Yep,
yeah.
Exactly. So maybe, John, you, some case studies that you see. Is it around diversity, equity, inclusion? Is it around supply chain? Where do you see these things coming up most?
Lots.
Okay, slightly longer answer.
Yeah, okay. Right, I'll give you some examples real quick. Global bank, in the diversity inclusion space, working with them to support the internal audit in undercovering and managing human rights issues across their customers in which they lend money to. Number two, at COP26, I talked about, COP26 was a real turning point, the 30 to the 90%. In that, what you saw was businesses partnering with government like never before. I'll give you one example. There was about 100 countries around the globe partnered with the largest financial institutions around the world to reverse deforestation. So what they're now needing to do is to go through all these agreements that they have and say, well, where are we lending money which could downstream be used for deforestation, and how do we unpick that? So there's a huge exercise around data, understanding, unpicking, and reversing. I'll give you another example. A very large global toy manufacturer, they found that 92% of their emissions were actually in their supply chain. So what it meant is that they could completely eradicate all their emissions within their own operations, and it would actually make no impact at all to what they're doing around the planet. So here again, there's a huge piece of work in terms of going through the contracts, understanding the materiality of those, as we heard from before, prioritizing those, engaging with those suppliers, sometimes needing to bridge the understand commit gap, understanding and upskilling them, and actually working through. So I know we're short on time, so those are just a few examples, but there are lots and lots out there where we're engaging with clients.
And Lauren, what do you see?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I think that we gets a little bit confusing is when we think about ESG, we forget that it really manifests itself in the organization in a lot of ways that maybe you don't think of as ESG. And so one of the ways that I can say that the legal department in my organization gets really, I'll use the example of the S, of social. So I work at a human capital company, and basically we've decided that we know that all of our stakeholders win, whether they're investors, clients, employees. They all win when we attract, retain, and develop the best talent. And so we partner as a legal department. We're all hands on deck in this, right? Because we want to make sure that we are promoting diverse, equitable, inclusive environment, that we are training our employees, we're developing them, we're paying them fairly, we're paying them in a way where they feel that they are part of a community. And so, and frankly, fair treatment, right? I mean, all of that is so critical. And so we as a legal department are partnering with the Human Resources Department, basically hand in hand, to really make sure that we're implementing these lawful strategies, making sure equity is, that pay is fair and equitable, that there's fair treatment of employees. And so there's really ways to partner with the organization on these pieces, whether it's corporate governance, social, or the environment, whether it's working with the finance team on reduction of real estate. I mean, all of these are real examples where you're getting in there with the organization and working on ESG initiatives.
Well, that's great. Well, I think we're out of time, so I think, John, it's time for us to sort of wrap up.
Shall we?
Wrap up the session.
Okay,
yes.
why
So
not?
I think today we've really only scratched the surface, haven't
For
we,
sure.
of ESG, and the CLOC Education Committee was very keen for us to put this session on. So I think we've had a good discussion, but I think it's the first of many, many more. So John, final words from you.
Yeah, just a couple of words from me. What I would say is the ESG train has left the station. This is the hydropower train, by the way, because it needs to be clean. So we really need to get on board. And just the last couple of key messages from me is that we need to act now and act decisively. This is so, so important. We've heard about this cliff edge of regulations that's coming, but also the momentum in business and the drive. So let's progress, and let's progress urgently. And really importantly, when we consider that change curve that I talked through, and we know that change is hard, we know that it's tough, let's just ensure that we hold our nerve in pushing forwards and doing what is right for the long-term benefit of not only our companies and ourselves, but also the planet. I think we're done now, and I think we're just gonna get wrapped up by Laurie. So I'll come back to stage. Welcome, good to see you again.
That was amazing. Thank you. That was terrific. Thank you. All right, so what a session. I think we can agree it was indeed a super session. I love the statement that ESG restores balance and fairness. You know, at CLOC and at CGI, we think a lot about storytelling, how we take something that we know to be true and how we win hearts and minds, and that really landed with me. As we think about what ESG is and what it means to our organizations, it restores balance and fairness. So thank you to everyone for an amazing conversation. Our panelists shared so much knowledge and experience. It helps us all develop a better understanding of ESG and actions we should be taking within our own legal teams and organizations. Also, thank you, a huge thank you to our sponsor, KPMG, for developing and producing such a super session. Now, did you know there is actually an alternate meaning for ESG? That's right. It's a little obscure, but it stands for exhibit hall, snacks, and good times. So that's right. Coming up next, let's continue the conversation at the networking reception just next door in the exhibit hall. I'll see you there. Thank you.